A millionaire who chose the dust. Imagine this. You spent your whole life building everything people call success. Money, respect, power. But one morning, you wake up in silence. No one calls, no one visits. The same people you worked so hard for have forgotten who you are. That's what happened to Henry Walker, a man who could buy anything except peace. He thought he had everything until he realized he had built walls instead of connections. One day, tired of living in gold and loneliness, he made a choice no millionaire had ever made before. He walked away from luxury and began living as a construction worker with calloused hands, aching bones, and no one knowing his name. And there, among dust and sweat, Henry discovered something his money could never buy: truth. He learned what real work feels like, what hunger means, and what love costs when it's lost. But what he didn't expect was the secret his own children were hiding, a truth that would shake everything he had ever built. This story isn't just about a man who found humanity in hardship. It's about justice. It's about dignity. It's about every forgotten worker, every parent who gave everything, and every heart that learned the hard way that wealth means nothing without compassion. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever worked hard and still been treated like you don't matter, this story is for you. Watch till the end. Feel it. And if it touches your soul, comment below, share it, and subscribe, not for numbers, but to help spread what the world has forgotten. *** the value of human hearts. ***, because sometimes the richest people are the ones covered in dust. The man who chose simplicity. Henry Walker was once known as a man who could buy anything he wanted. He owned companies, cars, and properties that most people could only dream of. But as the years passed, his success began to feel empty. His children rarely visited. His house, though filled with luxury, echoed with silence. One morning, while drinking his coffee alone, Henry overheard two of his managers arguing in the next room. They didn't know he was listening. "He has no idea how the workers live," one of them said. "He talks about hard work, but he's never lifted a brick in his life." Henry froze. For the first time in years, someone's words pierced his heart. That night, he couldn't sleep. He thought about his workers, the ones who built his empire with sweat and patience. He thought about his own father, a humble carpenter who used to say, "A man only knows his worth when he learns the value of a single day's labor." Henry decided to do something no millionaire had ever done before. He wanted to feel the life of an ordinary man, the exhaustion, the effort, and the truth. The next day, he went to a small town 200 miles away. There, no one knew who he was. He rented a tiny room near a construction site and introduced himself as Harry, a worker looking for a job. The foreman looked him up and down. "You don't look like a builder," he said, half smiling. "I'll learn," Henry replied, and so his new life began. The first week was brutal. His hands, soft from years of board meetings, cracked and bled. His back ached. His clothes were soaked with sweat by noon. But he didn't complain. He listened. He observed. And what he saw broke his heart. Workers laughed through their pain. They shared food even when they barely had enough. They spoke of dreams, simple dreams, like buying shoes for their kids or fixing a leaking roof. One young man named Sam worked beside Henry. He was thin but strong, always smiling. "Harry," Sam said one day during lunch, "why do you look so sad? You're new here, but you already carry a heavy heart." Henry smiled weakly. "Just thinking about life," he said. Sam laughed. "Life's simple, brother. Work hard, eat, love your family. That's all." That night, Henry couldn't stop thinking about Sam's words. Work hard, eat, love your family. He realized he had forgotten the last part long ago. At the end of the month, payday came. Henry received an envelope with his first wage as a laborer. A small amount compared to what he spent daily as a millionaire. But holding that envelope, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride. He walked home under the evening sky, his shirt dirty, his body tired, but his heart light. When he reached his small rented room, he placed the envelope on the table and whispered to himself, "So this is what real work feels like." He decided to send part of that money to a local orphanage. It wasn't much, but it came from sweat, not investment returns. It made him feel human again. The next day, while working, he noticed something strange. Sam was looking at his phone, frowning. "Everything all right?" Henry asked. Sam hesitated. "It's my father. He's sick, but I can't afford to visit him. The bus ticket costs too much." Henry's heart ached. Without thinking, he offered some of his own money. Sam refused at first, but eventually accepted with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, brother," he said. "You don't know how much this means." Henry smiled. Family always comes first. That night, as Henry lay on his thin bed, a strange thought crossed his mind. He had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, but none of them had called him in weeks. They were too busy managing the family businesses. He wondered if they even cared that their father was gone. He picked up his phone to check for messages. Nothing, only silence. Still, he felt peace for the first time in years. What Henry didn't know was that this 1 month as a bricklayer would uncover something far deeper, something his millions could never have bought. Because soon he would discover the darkest secret his own children had been hiding from him. And that truth would change his life forever. Cracks in the wall. The second week taught Henry that muscle was not the most important tool on a construction site. Patience was. A wall did not rise out of pride. It rose 1 brick at a time, with lines checked and rechecked, with mortar mixed to the right consistency, with men who watched out for one another. Henry learned to respect the slow rhythm. He learned that speed without accuracy cost more in the end. He learned to say, "Let's do it right," even when his shoulders begged for rest. Sam kept working beside him like a brother. He sang while he lifted blocks, told jokes during water breaks, and shared a piece of bread when Henry forgot his lunch. "Harry," Sam said, tapping a brick into place, "money is like this mortar. Too little, and the wall is weak. Too much, and it spills everywhere, making a mess. Balance, brother, balance." Henry tucked the words into his mind, the way a mason hides a plumb line in his pocket. One morning, the foreman introduced a new supervisor named Clark. He wore polished boots and sunglasses that didn't match the dust. "We're behind schedule," Clark announced. "From today, no paid overtime and no free safety gloves. Bring your own." The workers fell silent. Gloves meant fewer injuries. Without them, hands cracked deeper, bled longer. Henry watched Sam's smile fade. At lunch, Henry asked softly, "Has Clark been here long?" "No," Sam murmured. "He came after a call from someone powerful. He keeps changing rules to save pennies." "Pennies for who?" Sam shrugged. "Not for us." That night, Henry's phone buzzed for the first time in days. A message from his oldest son, Daniel. "Dad, we handled the supplier. Negotiation. Signed a new agreement. Big savings. Enjoy your rest." The word savings stabbed Henry in the same place Clark's words had. He typed a reply, then erased it. He didn't tell his son he was laying bricks with men who needed gloves. He didn't ask why the contract had been signed without him. He only stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet, wondering when his voice had stopped mattering in his own company. The next day, a small accident happened. A young worker named Lise slipped on wet cement and grazed his forearm against a metal edge. It wasn't serious, but it bled a lot. Gloves. The foreman muttered angrily. We need gloves. Clark walked over, looked at the blood, and said, Back to work after you wash it. Henry felt heat rise in his chest. He stepped forward. He needs proper bandages, Henry said. And we need gloves tomorrow. Clark's sunglasses turned toward him. And you are? Harry, the guy who cares about the people who build your schedule. A few workers coughed to hide their smiles. Clark walked away without answering. During the ride home in the evening, Sam sat beside Henry on the bus. You're not like the others, Sam said. You choose people over rules. Why? Henry looked out the window at neighborhoods of small houses and clotheslines like flags of survival. Because I forgot to do that for too long, he said. I'm trying to remember again. That weekend, Henry visited the little orphanage where he had left his first envelope. The woman at the desk recognized him. Harry, she smiled, your help came at the right moment. We paid the heating bill. She introduced him to a boy who loved drawing cranes and buildings. The boy showed Henry a sketch of a skyline, wobbly but full of hope. Will it stand? The boy asked. If we build it with care, Henry said. He left with wet eyes and a lighter heart. On Monday, the foreman gathered everyone. We have a surprise audit tomorrow, he announced. Someone important is coming. Clark straightened his posture, as if polishing his own spine. The news stirred the site like wind. Workers cleaned paths, stacked materials carefully, and fixed signs. Henry noticed Sam's hands trembling while tying rebar. You okay? He asked. Sam nodded, then shook his head. I got a call last night from my landlord. He's raising the rent. If I can't pay, I have to move in 2 weeks. How much? Henry asked. Sam told him. It was the price of a dinner where Henry used to sign deals. He swallowed. He couldn't keep fixing everything with his wallet. That wasn't the lesson. He needed to understand the system, the pipes and valves that carried money away from the hands that earned it. Let's finish today, Henry said. We'll think. Clearly after. The audit day arrived. The someone important turned out to be a representative from the parent investment group Henry's own holding company. She introduced herself as Miss Cole. We are impressed by cost management, she said to Clark, reading notes from a tablet. Margins improved. After the supplier renegotiations, especially on protective equipment and overtime, the words tasted like chalk in Henry's mouth. He stepped back, breathing slow. Protective equipment, gloves, savings. When Ms. Cole asked for a tour, Clark led proudly. Henry walked behind with the crew. He heard Louise whisper, if they want margins, they should carry blocks for a week. Sam squeezed his shoulder to keep him calm. Not here, brother, he whispered. Near the west wall, Ms. Cole paused at a stack of invoices on a pallet. She flipped through the pages and smiled. Excellent. Central procurement is working. These are signed by. She stopped mid-sentence, and Henry felt the ground shift beneath him. By Daniel Walker, she finished. Henry's oldest son. Miss Cole looked up. Our partner's son is efficient. We expect similar sign-offs for the next quarter. She continued walking. The workers only heard a name. Henry heard a message. Your son controls what the workers touch. That night, Henry sat alone on the edge of his narrow bed with the light off. He let the dark settle until it felt like a blanket. A father wants his children to lead, to grow, to take responsibility. He had handed them the keys. Because leadership is a legacy. But what if the car they were driving ran over the feet of the men who paved the road? He opened his old email account, the one he used before assistants filtered his world. He searched for gloves procurement. A string of messages appeared: vendor bids, cost breakdowns, a summary noting projected savings, discontinue complimentary PPE, introduce employee purchase option. The author line glowed like a cold moon. Daniel Walker. Attached was a memo recommending discipline in overtime approvals to encourage productivity. There were notes from his second son, Michael, about performance-based rotations that cut hours for slower workers, regardless of age or injury. Henry closed the laptop. He felt betrayed and guilty at the same time. He had taught his children spreadsheets, not stories. Returns, not relationships. He had handed them a compass and forgotten to point north. The following morning, he arrived early, before sunrise. The sky was the color of wet cement. He bought a box of gloves with his own saved wages and placed them on the table in the tool shed. When the men arrived, confusion turned to relief. "Who bought these?" the foreman asked. Henry said quietly. "A friend," Clark stormed in minutes later. "Remove those," he snapped. "They aren't approved inventory." Henry stood still. "Then approve them now." "You don't give orders," Clark said. "You lift bricks." "I lift people," Henry said, voice low but steady. "And people need hands." The crew stared, waiting for a fight. Clark pointed to the gate. "You're suspended for the day." Sam stepped forward. "If he goes, I go." A few others nodded. The room felt like a wire pulled tight. The foreman, a practical man with creased eyes, raised both hands. "Enough." The audit praised our efficiency. "If we lose men, we lose time. The gloves stay today. Harry works. We'll talk after hours." Clark gritted his teeth, but said nothing. Work resumed. Hammers clicked like metronomes. Henry laid bricks with a focus he had not felt since he was a young entrepreneur, building his first office with second-hand furniture and borrowed courage. He watched the wall rise, straight and honest, and thought about another wall one between himself and his children, built from busy calendars and silent dinners. During a water break, Sam whispered, "Why risk your job for us?" Henry answered truthfully, "Because if I don't act now, I will be too late for everything that matters." After the shift, the foreman invited Henry to his office, a small container with a desk, a cracked mug, and a calendar that still showed last month. "Harry," he said, studying him, "you came from somewhere else. You know things." He gestured to the chair. "Sit." Henry sat. The foreman continued, "Clark's policies aren't his. Orders come from higher. Someone wants the books to look pretty." "Pretty books, ugly hands," Henry murmured. The foreman nodded. "I can fight small battles, but big ones need bigger names. Who do you know?" Henry's throat tightened. He stared at the floor. "Enough people," he said at last. "But first I need proof." The foreman slid a folder across the table. "Anonymous copies of recent memos," he said quietly. "Someone left them in my mailbox. Maybe it was a conscience." Henry opened the folder. There it was, the signature again. Daniel Walker. A second memo bore another familiar name, Michael Walker. And a third document, a private briefing, mentioned his daughter, Grace, in a different tone. Employee morale campaign, social media series showing family values at partner sites. Family values. In the same week, they cut gloves. The room seemed to tilt. Henry stood. "May I borrow these?" The foreman nodded. "Bring them back tomorrow." He hesitated. "Harry, are you going to make trouble?" Henry slid the papers into his bag and answered softly, "No, I'm going to make it right." Walking home under a sky slowly filling with stars, Henry felt the weight of both brick and blood. The secret was no longer a rumor. His own sons had signed away safety in the name of savings. His daughter, with good intentions perhaps, had painted a picture that hid their pain. He imagined their faces at the dinner table. Daniel confident, Michael precise, Grace hopeful. He loved them with a love that tripped over itself, the way a father's love always does. But love without correction is just silence wearing a smile. At the door of his small room, he paused and looked at his hands. New cuts crossed old ones. He flexed his fingers and whispered a promise. To the men on site and to the children he had raised. Tomorrow, he said, tomorrow I start rebuilding the right wall. The hidden blueprint. The next morning, Henry woke up before dawn. The air was heavy with mist, and the world felt both new and tired. He packed the documents carefully into a brown envelope and hid it under his shirt. The papers weren't just evidence. They were a mirror of everything he had built and everything he had lost. When he arrived at the site, the men greeted him with quiet nods. They respected him now, though they still didn't know who he truly was. Sam handed him a cup of tea. You look like you didn't sleep, he said. Henry smiled faintly. Some walls keep you awake. The day began as usual, but Henry's thoughts were elsewhere. Every hammer strike echoed with questions. How had his sons become so blind? How had he, a man who once fought for every employee, become the kind of leader his workers feared? At lunch, Henry sat apart, reading the documents again. The memos detailed a series of cost-cutting initiatives, removal of safety gear, unpaid overtime, incentive models, and delayed medical reimbursements. Each page carried his son's signatures like invisible scars on his conscience. He closed the folder and stared at the horizon. He knew that confronting them, as Harry the worker, was impossible. He needed to return home, not as a millionaire, not even as their father, but as a man who had rediscovered truth. That night, he took the train. Back to the city. The ride was long and silent. Every station light reflected on the window, like flashes of memory. The day Daniel got his first job. The evening Michael gave his first speech about ethics. The night Grace cried when their mother died. He had been proud then, but pride without presence turns into distance. When he reached his mansion, the guards looked at him twice before recognizing his face under the dirt. "Sir?" one of them whispered. "Mr. Walker, what happened to you?" Henry smiled. "I was working." He walked past them into the house. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and loneliness. He stood in the grand living room, where portraits of his family hung on the walls. Their smiles seemed frozen in time, untouched by reality. He looked at his late wife's picture and whispered, "I failed to protect them from comfort." The next morning, Henry called for a board meeting. His sons and daughter arrived, surprised to see him. "Dad," Daniel said, half smiling, "you're back early. We thought you were on vacation." Henry placed the brown envelope on the table. "Vacation," he repeated quietly. "That's one word for it." Michael frowned. "Is everything all right?" Henry's voice was calm but sharp. "No, nothing is all right." "Sit down." They obeyed. He opened the envelope and spread the memos across the polished table. "Tell me about these," he said. Daniel blinked. "These are internal documents." "How did you get them?" "I asked the men whose blood stains." "Your savings." Henry's tone cut through the air. "I worked with them. I built walls with them. I watched one of them bleed because he couldn't afford gloves. And then," he lifted a page, "I saw your signature approving the removal of safety equipment." The room fell silent. Grace covered her mouth. Michael looked away. Daniel leaned forward, defensive. "Dad, business requires efficiency. You always said." "I said measure cost, not compassion." Henry slammed his hand on the table. "You took my words and turned them into excuses." Grace whispered, "I didn't know." Henry turned to her. "You?" painted happiness while they bled behind the walls. You called it family values. Tears filled her eyes. I just wanted to honor your legacy. My legacy, Henry said softly, was supposed to make life better for others, not cheaper. Daniel rose from his seat, frustration rising. You can't blame us for adapting. The world has changed, Dad. Margins are thin. Investors demand results. Henry stared at him with weary eyes. Then maybe the world needs less investors and more sons. The silence that followed was painful. No one moved. The ticking clock in the corner sounded like judgment itself. Finally, Henry gathered the papers and stood. I built this company with hands like theirs. I gave you everything. But I forgot to give you hunger, the kind that earns respect, not just revenue. He walked toward the door but stopped halfway. Tomorrow, I'll visit the site with the auditors again. I want you all there. Maybe you'll see what I saw. The next day, under a bright morning sun, the walkers arrived at the construction site together. The workers froze in surprise as limousines pulled up and men in suits stepped out. Henry wore his same dusty clothes, refusing to change. Clark hurried. Over nervous. Sir, welcome back. We didn't expect. Henry interrupted. You never do. He turned to his children. This is where your spreadsheets meet reality. Daniel tried to act composed, greeting the foreman and pretending confidence. But when he saw the workers' faces tired, bruised, proud something in him shifted. Luis, the young man who had been injured, walked by with a fresh bandage. Sam waved from a distance. Henry led them to the west wall, where he had worked day after day. This, he said, touching the rough bricks, is where I found myself again. Every stone has more honesty than some. Boardrooms I've been in. He looked at Daniel. You cut the gloves to save costs. Touch this wall. Daniel hesitated, then placed his hand on the rough surface. The calluses and cracks of the bricks pressed into his skin. It's rough, he murmured. Henry nodded. It should be. Grace approached a group of workers and thanked them quietly. One of them handed her a pair of gloves. Keep them, he said kindly. You might need them someday. She smiled through tears. Michael stood silently, watching his father hand wages to a few men from his own pocket. Something inside him softened. He had seen charts, but never faces. Later that afternoon, Henry called a press meeting at the site itself. Reporters gathered, confused by the setting. Standing in front of the half-built wall, Henry addressed them. For years, we've built towers of glass and steel. But somewhere along the way, we forgot to build trust. Today, we start again from the ground up. He announced a full audit of company practices, a new fund for worker safety, and a salary increase program for laborers. He named Sam as one of the community representatives. Daniel stepped forward, eyes lowered. Dad, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I thought profit was progress. Henry placed a hand on his shoulder. Progress is people walking together, not stepping on each other. That night, back at the site, the workers lit candles in honor of the change. Sam hugged Henry tightly. You did it, brother, he said. Henry smiled. No, Sam, we did it. As the flames flickered in the cool wind, Henry looked at his children standing among the workers, laughing, talking, learning. For the first time in years, the silence in his heart began to fade. He realized that sometimes, to rebuild a family, you first have to tear down the wrong kind of walls, the price of truth. The news spread faster than Henry imagined. Within days, headlines appeared on business channels and social media. Millionaire builder lives as laborer, one article said. Another called him a man who remembered humanity. Investors were divided. Some praised his courage, others questioned his sanity. But Henry didn't care about stock values anymore. He cared about moral value. In the office, the atmosphere was tense. His sons handled media calls with shaky voices. Daniel spent hours crafting statements about new ethical directions, while Michael worked on revising the budget to accommodate safety measures. Grace, meanwhile, launched an internal campaign called Hands That Build, featuring real worker stories. For the first time, the family worked together, not to grow profits, but to repair trust. Still, not everyone was happy. Clark was furious. He called Henry late one evening. "You humiliated me," he snapped. "You made me look like a fool in front of the board." Henry's voice remained calm. "You did that yourself, Clark. You made men bleed for numbers. I was following orders." "Then next time, follow conscience." The call ended. But Henry knew it wasn't over. Some people didn't forgive humiliation, especially when their power was built on fear. A week later, during a site inspection, Henry found a letter slipped under his office door. It had no signature, only words scrawled in haste. Asterisk, they're planning to remove you. The board thinks you've lost your mind. Asterisk, he wasn't surprised. Money had all eyes that loyalty never could, yet he felt no fear. For the first time in years, he knew what side he stood on, even if he had to stand alone. That evening, Henry invited his children for dinner at the same table where he once scolded them for minor mistakes. The room felt different now. There was warmth, not authority. "Dad," Daniel said, pouring water into his glass, "I know about the board. They've been talking." Henry nodded. "Let them talk. If they remove me, they'll only prove that business without a heart is a corpse that moves." Michael leaned forward. "We can fight this. Grace and I have connections in the media. We'll expose the corruption." Henry smiled faintly. "No, we'll fix it, not fight it. We don't destroy walls, we reinforce them." Grace looked at him, her eyes soft. "You've changed." Henry exhaled. "Maybe I just remembered who I was before I became who they wanted me to be." Over the next few days, the company faced heavy scrutiny. Government officials visited the sites to verify safety conditions. The auditors confirmed Henry's new reforms. Workers began to speak openly about the changes, about fair wages, protective gear, and the respect they now received. Videos of their gratitude went viral, touching millions. But behind the scenes, the board grew restless. Profits had dipped temporarily, and they blamed Henry's reforms. One morning, he was summoned to an emergency meeting. When he entered the room, 12 executives sat in silence. A chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, your recent actions have damaged investor confidence. We appreciate your intentions, but sentiment doesn't build skyscrapers." Henry looked around the room. Men and women he had hired, mentored, even defended. "No," he said quietly. "Sentiment doesn't build skyscrapers, but without it, no one lives in them." The chairman frowned. "We voted to temporarily suspend you from operational duties." Daniel jumped up. "You can't." Henry raised his hand. "It's all right. Let them." He looked each board member in the eye. "But remember, when numbers rise and souls fall, no building stands forever." He left the room calmly. Outside, reporters were waiting. One shouted, "Mr. Walker, are you being removed?" Henry stopped, smiled, and replied, "You can't remove a man from his purpose." That line trended for 3 days. During his suspension, Henry didn't rest. He visited multiple sites, met with workers, and listened to their stories. One woman told him how she could finally afford her daughter's school books. Another said her husband came home without injuries for the first time in months. Henry wrote each story down in a notebook labeled **the real accounts**. **. One evening, as he sat by the river near the first site he had ever built, Sam found him. They really suspended you? Sam asked. Henry nodded. Yes, but suspension is just another word for freedom. Sam chuckled. You're strange. Harry, Henry laughed. Maybe, but I'd rather be strange and awake than normal and blind. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water carry away leaves and reflections. You know, Sam said finally, my father's doing better. The hospital took him in. Because of that money you gave me. Henry smiled gently. That was your strength, not my money. You chose to care. The following week, an invitation arrived from a well-known university. They wanted Henry to give a lecture about ethics and leadership in modern business. He accepted, but instead of presenting slides, he brought a brick and a pair of gloves. When he stepped onto the stage, the audience of executives, students, and journalists fell silent. He held up the brick. This is honesty, he said. Heavy, rough, but real. It can hold the weight of the world if placed with care. Then he lifted the gloves. And these, he continued, represent protection, not just for hands, but for hearts. A company that forgets protection will one day protect nothing. When he finished, the room stood in applause. Cameras flashed. Even the board couldn't ignore the wave of admiration that followed. A few days later, the chairman called. Mr. Walker, he said stiffly, the board requests your return. Public confidence has risen. Investors admire your integrity. Henry smiled to himself. Integrity pays better than interest, doesn't it? The man on the phone didn't answer. Henry hung up. That night, he walked back to the construction site once more. The wall he had built with his own hands stood complete. The men had placed a small plaque at its base. Asterisk for the man who worked beside us. Asterisk. Sam stood next to him, grinning. Looks like they finally see you for who you are. Henry looked up at the wall, glowing under the evening light. No, Sam, they finally see themselves. He stayed there until sunset, listening to the laughter of workers echoing across the yard. The sky turned gold, and the air carried the smell of wet cement. Fresh, honest, alive. In that moment, Henry realized something profound. Success was never about what he built, but about who he became while building it. The legacy rebuilt. Weeks passed, and the dust of controversy slowly settled. The world moved on, but Henry's story continued to ripple through quiet corners of society. Workers began writing to him from different towns, thanking him for giving them a voice. Young entrepreneurs quoted his words about honesty and protection. Even politicians used his name to promote ethical reforms. But Henry didn't want fame. He wanted peace. One morning, Grace entered his study carrying a folder. Dad, she said softly, I've been collecting letters from employees across all our sites. You should read them. Henry looked up from his notebook. The folder was thick, filled with handwritten words, fingerprints, even smudges of concrete dust. He opened one letter at random. It read, Asterisk single quote, sir. We don't know you as a millionaire. We know you as the man who cared enough to get his hands dirty. Asterisk Henry smiled, eyes glistening. This, he whispered, is the only dividend that matters. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Michael joined him. They looked different now, humbler, quieter. Daniel placed a document on the desk. Dad, we've been revising the company mission statement. We want you to approve it. Henry read the first line aloud. Asterisk, built with purpose, not pride. Asterisk, he nodded slowly. It's not just good, he said. It's true. Michael hesitated before speaking. There's something else we want to do. We're launching a foundation in Mounds. Name for workers' education and safety awareness. We want it to carry your philosophy. Henry closed his eyes for a moment. Your mother would have been proud. he said softly. She always believed wealth meant responsibility. That evening, the family shared dinner together. No servants, no formalities. Just plates passed hand to hand. Grace told stories from her campaigns. Daniel joked about learning to mix cement. Michael laughed at his first attempt to lift a brick. Henry watched them with quiet joy. The table that once echoed with silence was now full of life. The sound of laughter was his new success. After dinner, Henry stepped outside to the garden. The air was cool, scented with jasmine. Sam arrived unexpectedly, carrying his little daughter. "Harry," he called, waving. "I thought you might want to meet someone." The girl shyly held a small drawing, a wall under a golden sky with stick figures, holding hands. Beneath it, she had written, * me father's hero, * Henry knelt down, speechless. "That's beautiful," he said, voice trembling. Sam smiled. "She wanted to thank you for everything." Henry touched the drawing gently. "No, Sam, thank you for reminding me what real work means." Days turned into weeks, and one morning Henry decided to visit the first construction site again, the one where he had lived as Harry. He wore the same worn-out boots, though now they felt like a badge of honor. When he arrived, the foreman greeted him warmly. "Sir, the new housing units are finished. We even named one after you, the Walker Block." Henry laughed. "I hope it doesn't collapse." "Not a chance," the foreman replied. "It's built with the strongest thing there is, respect." Walking through the site, Henry noticed how different everything felt. Workers wore gloves and helmets. Safety posters hung on walls. Laughter replaced exhaustion. The same men who once bent under weight now walked with dignity. He passed a group of apprentices studying building plans. One of them asked shyly, "Sir, is it true you used to be a laborer here?" Henry grinned. "Not used to be. I still am, just one with a different set of tools." The boys laughed. It was the kind of laughter that builds futures. Later that day, Henry sat near the wall he had built months before. Its surface was rough but strong, just like the lessons it carried. Grace joined him quietly, holding a small video camera. "I'm filming a documentary about what you did," she said. "Not the story of a millionaire, but of a man who remembered his heart." Henry smiled faintly. "Just promise me one thing. Don't end it with applause. End it with action." As the sun began to set, Daniel and Michael arrived too. The four of them sat together on a pile of stones, watching the orange light fade into dusk. Henry broke the silence. "You know, when I started building, I thought money was the foundation of everything. But it's not. The real foundation is character. Without it, even a palace collapses." Daniel nodded. "You were right to walk away." "From us, Dad. It made us walk back with open eyes." Henry chuckled. "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to see what you truly have." A breeze moved through the site, carrying the scent of wet earth. The workers began packing their tools, waving as they left. One of them called out, "Good night, Mr. Walker." Henry waved back. The title no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. When darkness settled, he stood and dusted off his hands. "It's time to go home," he said. Grace looked at him. "Home?" He smiled. "Yes, not the house. The place where love and effort meet. That's home." As they walked toward the car, Michael asked softly, "Dad, do you ever regret pretending to be someone else?" Henry looked at the stars above. "No. Pretending made me remember who I am. Sometimes you have to live as the poor to learn how to be truly rich." The next morning, newspapers carried a new headline, *The Walker. Foundation launches global campaign for worker dignity. *. The photo showed Henry shaking hands with Sam and a group of laborers, all smiling. But Henry didn't even read the article. He was already at another site, helping a young architect check the angles of a new foundation. As he placed his hand on the first brick, he whispered, "Let's build this one right." Years later, long after Henry retired, the company still carried his principles. Every site began with a ritual, the laying of one brick in silence, as workers remembered the man who had worked beside them. His children continued his mission, expanding schools, improving safety, and funding homes for families in need. And in every one of those homes, somewhere on a wall, there hung a simple quote engraved on brass. Asterisk. A true builder is not the one who raises walls, but the one who breaks the ones between arts. Asterisk. Henry Walker died peacefully at 83, surrounded by his family. When they opened his final letter, it read, Asterisk, if you ever forget why we build, go back to the dust. It will remind you of the worth of your hands. Asterisk. The world remembered him not as a millionaire, but as a man who became human again. The echo of a builder. Years passed, and the world changed faster than anyone could have imagined. Skyscrapers grew taller, technology replaced old tools, and industries became smarter, colder, and quicker. But amid all that speed, people still spoke of one man who chose to slow down, the builder who traded gold for dust. Henry Walker's name had become more than a signature on company walls. It was a symbol. Universities taught his story in ethics courses. Documentaries replayed his month as a laborer every year on his birthday. But what mattered most were the quiet things, the ones that never made headlines. In a small town far from the city, a group of children walked to a school built with funds from the Walker Foundation. On the gate, engraved in steel, were Henry's words. Asterisk, character builds what money cannot. Asterisk, inside, a teacher told his story to the class every Monday. He wasn't just rich, she said. He was rich because he remembered the value of people. The children listened with shining eyes, some dreaming. At another construction site, Sam, now gray-haired but strong, supervised a group of apprentices. He wore gloves, as always, and kept a photo of Henry in his wallet. You see this man? He would say to newcomers. He taught me that hands build more than walls. They build dignity. When one of the boys asked if Henry was his boss, Sam smiled. No, son. He was my brother. Grace, who had become a filmmaker, released her final documentary about her father titled Asterisk, The Man Who Built Hearts. Asterisk. It wasn't about wealth or business. It was about a man rediscovering love through labor. The film spread globally, translated into dozens of languages. Millions watched, and many wept. In one interview, Grace said, My father didn't die rich in money. He died rich in meaning. Daniel, once obsessed with numbers, now ran the foundation full-time. He had turned away from corporate expansion and instead focused on building housing for the poor. During one inauguration, a journalist asked, Mr. Walker, why did your family give up luxury for this? Daniel smiled gently. Because luxury without purpose is just emptiness with a prettier face. Michael became an educator. He developed training programs for young business leaders to teach them that compassion is not weakness, it's structure. My father didn't just teach us how to succeed, he said during a lecture. He taught us how not to forget ourselves while doing it. And yet, even as the world honored Henry, there was one story that remained private, known only to Sam. Every year, on the anniversary of Henry's passing, Sam visited the old construction site where it all began. The wall still stood, unbroken by time, weathered but strong. On the ground below it, flowers appeared every season, left by strangers who had heard his story. Sam would stand there silently, resting his hand on the bricks. Still solid, Harry, he would whisper. Still holding up. One year, During one of these visits, a young man approached him. "Excuse me." "Sir," he said, "are you the worker who once knew Mr. Walker?" Sam nodded. The young man smiled shyly. "My mother said her life changed because of his foundation. She became a nurse because of a scholarship he started. I just wanted to thank you for being part of that story." Sam felt tears in his eyes. "I just mixed the cement, son. He built the dream." The young man bowed respectfully and walked away. Sam looked at the horizon and thought, "Asterisk, this is how real builders live forever, in the stories they leave behind." Asterisk. As years continued to roll forward, the Walker Foundation grew into a movement. It wasn't about charity anymore. It was about connection. They called it Asterisk, the Builder's Code. Asterisk, the principles were simple. Asterisk, earn honestly, spend wisely, protect others, leave no one behind. Asterisk, these words appeared in classrooms, offices, even government halls. It became a quiet revolution, one brick of one goodness at a time. And somewhere beyond the noise of cities, in the stillness of memory, Henry's story lived on. People didn't remember the color of his cars or the size of his mansion. They remembered his hands, rough, scarred, and full of purpose. Those hands had taught the world that success is not measured by how high you build, but by how deep your foundation reaches. One winter evening, Grace visited the old wall with her brothers. The site had been turned into a memorial park. A small plaque read, Asterisk, he lived as a laborer to learn how to lead as a human. Asterisk, Daniel traced the words with his fingers. "It's strange," he said softly. "He built this with his hands, but it feels like he built us." Grace nodded. "He did," Michael added quietly. "He used bricks. But what he really built was belief." They stood in silence, each lost in memory. A gentle wind blew through the site, carrying dust and peace together. For a moment, it felt like their father was there again, watching over them with a smile. As they left, Grace stopped to film one last shot for her documentary, the wall glowing under the sunset. Her voice narrated softly. "We often chase success as if it's a tower to climb, but sometimes true greatness lies beneath our feet, in the ground where humility grows." When the documentary aired, millions watched the closing scene, a panoramic view of the old wall surrounded by trees and sunlight. And as her father's voice echoed from an old recording, it felt as if the world stopped to listen. Asterisk, if you ever forget why you build, Asterisk, Henry's voice said, calm and steady. Asterisk, go back to the dust. It remembers everything. Asterisk, the screen faded to black. Silence filled living rooms, theaters, and classrooms around the world. Some cried. Some smiled. Some simply sat in thought, their own reflections awakening. In the years that followed, whenever a new building opened under the Walker name, workers performed a quiet ritual, laying one brick with their bare hands before construction began. They would close their eyes and whisper, "For the hands that built before us." The tradition spread far beyond the company. Builders in other countries began doing it too. Even corporations unrelated to construction adopted similar ceremonies, symbolic gestures of gratitude and integrity. And so, long after his death, Henry Walker continued to build. Not walls, not offices, but generations of people who believed that greatness begins with kindness. Because in the end, it wasn't the skyscrapers that kept his legacy standing. It was the people. The same people he had once worked beside, laughed with, and learned from. The same people who, brick by brick, built the man who had once forgotten what truly mattered. Henry Walker's story didn't end in wealth. It ended in humanity, the richest foundation of all. The new foundation. 20 years had passed since Henry Walker's death, but his story had become something larger than memory. It was now a compass. The Walker Foundation had expanded to dozens of countries, its schools filled with students who believed in his message, that integrity, not ambition, was the truest form of progress. Among those students was a young man named Aaron. He was 24, full of ideas and burning with the same restless energy Henry once had in his youth. Aaron came from a poor background, raised by a mother who worked in a textile factory and a father who fixed bicycles. His dream was to build something lasting, a company that could change lives, not just balance sheets. He had studied Henry Walker's philosophy in school, memorized his speeches, and even visited the memorial site with his class. But ideals are easy when you're young and untested. Real trials begin when opportunity knocks wearing a smile. Aaron had started a small construction startup that focused on affordable housing. His team of 10 workers believed in his vision. But as months passed, the business struggled. Costs rose, clients delayed payments, and banks refused loans. Then, one afternoon, an investor named Mr. Grant appeared in his office. Sharp suit, cold smile, smooth words. "I've heard about your company," Grant said. "I admire your vision. But dreams don't pay. Bills, Mr. Aaron. Let me help you build real wealth." Aaron hesitated. "What do you mean?" Grant leaned back. "We'll cut costs. Replace the local suppliers with cheaper ones overseas. Pay your workers less. Maybe skip safety standards, just until we scale. I'll fund everything. You'll be rich in a year." Aaron's stomach tightened. He remembered Henry Walker's quote carved on the school wall. Asterisk, if you ever forget why you build, go back to the dust. Asterisk, but dust didn't pay rent, and his workers depended on him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He opened an old notebook, the one he had kept from his school days, and found a photo from the Walker Foundation. Henry stood smiling beside laborers, his hands rough, his eyes soft. Beneath the picture was a phrase written in Henry's handwriting. Asterisk, when your hands stay clean but your heart turns dirty, you've already fallen. Asterisk. The next morning, Aaron met with his team. "We have two choices," he said. "We can get rich fast or build slow but right. I won't blame anyone who wants to leave." No one moved. One of the older workers, Maya, spoke up. "We didn't join you for the money, boss. We joined you because you build like Walker." Aaron felt his throat tighten. "Then we'll do this together," he said. "Even if it takes longer." They refused Grant's offer. Weeks turned into months, and the company barely survived. Some days, Aaron had to sell his personal belongings to pay wages. Yet word spread about their integrity. A journalist from a local magazine wrote an article titled Asterisk, The Young Builder Who Said No. Asterisk, it went viral. Donations started arriving from people who believed in the cause, including one envelope with no return address, containing a handwritten note that said, Asterisk, proud of you. Keep building right. Asterisk, it was signed simply, Asterisk, G.W. Asterisk, likely. Grace Walker. With new funding, Aaron's company grew steadily. They built homes for war widows, schools for remote villages, and community centers for workers. Each building had a plaque quoting Henry Walker. Asterisk, a true builder breaks the walls between arts. Years later, Aaron was invited to speak at the same university where Henry once held his legendary lecture. The auditorium was packed, students, business leaders, and journalists waiting to hear what the new generation of builders had to say. Aaron walked on stage, nervous but grounded. He carried a single brick in one hand and a pair of gloves in the other, just like Henry had decades ago. "These belong to the man who taught me what real construction means," he began. "Not construction of walls, but of lives." He placed the brick on the podium. "Every generation must decide what to build. Some build towers, some build brands. But a few, the rare few, build trust. That's what Henry Walker did, and that's what we must continue to do. After the speech, students surrounded him, asking questions. One girl said, "Sir, how do you stay honest when everyone else cuts corners?" Aaron smiled. By remembering that honesty isn't a rule, it's a muscle. You use it or you lose it. The foundation later announced that Aaron's company would become an official partner in its global initiative. His workers, once ordinary laborers, were now trainers teaching young people how to build ethically. Every project they touched carried both their name and Walker's spirit. One evening, as Aaron stood on the balcony of a new housing complex they had just finished, Maya joined him. The city lights shimmered below. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked. Aaron chuckled. "Not like this. I thought wealth would feel heavier. Turns out, it's light when it's shared." They stood in silence, watching a family move into their new home. Children laughing, parents smiling, lights turning on for the first time. "That," Aaron whispered, "is profit." As years passed, Aaron became known as the second builder, but he always corrected people. "No," he'd say, "I'm just continuing what Henry started." On his office wall hung Henry's final letter, framed behind glass. Sometimes Aaron would read it aloud when making decisions. Asterisk, if you ever forget why we build, go back to the dust. Asterisk. And he did, every time doubt crept in, every time temptation knocked. He'd visit the old Walker Memorial, touch the wall and whisper, "Still standing." Because some legacies aren't inherited. They're rebuilt, brick by brick, through the hands of those who refuse to forget. And so, the echo of one builder became the anthem of many. The world kept changing. Faster, louder, greedier. But there would always be people who remembered the dust, the sweat, and the simple truth Henry Walker had taught. Asterisk, we are not remembered for what we own. We are remembered for what we build inside others. Asterisk. The world begins to build. It started with one brick, one idea, one man's courage to live as the people he once overlooked. But by the time 2 generations had passed, Henry Walker's lesson had become a quiet revolution that spread farther than anyone had ever imagined. The Builders Code movement had reached 42 countries. In small towns and great cities alike, construction sites became classrooms, and companies turned into communities. Posters of Henry's quote, asterisk, "We are not remembered for what we own, but for what we build inside others," asterisk, appeared not as slogans, but as promises. At a youth conference in South America, Aaron stood before a crowd of thousands. Behind him, a large banner displayed a single image, a pair of gloves resting on a brick. "These," Aaron said, holding up his own gloves, "belong to a man who understood that leadership begins where comfort ends." The audience stood, cheering, not for him, but for the message. Cameras flashed, but Aaron looked calm. He wasn't chasing fame. He was preserving faith. Later, during a panel discussion, a journalist asked him, "Mr. Aaron, your company could easily dominate the global market if you cut costs like others. Why not take that route?" Aaron smiled. "Because domination builds empires. Compassion builds nations." The room fell silent. That line became a headline the next morning. Meanwhile, schools across Asia began teaching the Builders Code as part of civic education. Students learned that every trade, whether building, teaching, or farming, carried dignity when done with purpose. In one classroom, a teacher showed an old photo of Henry Walker beside his workers. A student raised her hand and said, "He looks tired." The teacher smiled. "Yes," she replied. "Tired people built the world. Rested people must protect it." Back in Aaron's home city, the Walker Foundation announced a new initiative, Project Horizon. The goal was simple: build one self-sustaining community in every country using local labor and ethical construction. Each home would have solar power, clean water, and a plaque bearing the inscription, Asterisk, built by hands that remembered their worth. Asterisk. But success came with challenges. Some corporations mocked the idea, calling it idealistic nonsense. Investors withdrew, claiming it was not scalable. Aaron didn't argue. He simply visited each unfinished site, gathered the workers, and said, "We'll finish it anyway." They did, brick by brick, community by community. The dream spread again. In Kenya, a group of women built an entire village under Project Horizon. In Peru, miners who once risked their lives without protection created schools for their children. In Germany, engineers redesigned safety standards inspired by Henry Walker's story. And in India, a former child laborer became a foreman, his first paycheck donated to the Walker Foundation. Each story added a stone to a monument invisible but eternal. It wasn't made of marble or glass. It was made of choices, small, stubborn acts of decency that changed everything. One night, Aaron was invited to a private dinner with world leaders. They discussed poverty, automation, and the future of work. When his turn came to speak, he didn't bring charts or numbers. He placed a single brick on the table. "Before we talk about technology," he said, "let's remember who lays the first stone. Machines can build, but only humans can care." The room grew quiet. One prime minister leaned forward. "And what would you have us do, Mr. Aaron?" Aaron looked at him gently. "Start building people again." That conversation sparked what historians would later call the Human Construction Accord, a global agreement focusing on ethical labor, fair wages, and human dignity in industrial reform. The Walker Foundation became a key advisor. Aaron, though uncomfortable with titles, was named the Global Builder. But he never forgot his origins. Whenever a project ended, he'd return to the first wall Henry had built, now preserved, as a national heritage site. There, he would remove his gloves, touch the bricks, and whisper, "Still holding." Years passed. Aaron grew older, his hair streaked with gray, his hands rough again from work he refused to stop doing. One afternoon, he visited a school where children were painting murals about Henry Walker. A little girl approached him shyly, holding a small clay brick. "Mister," she said, "this one's for you." Aaron took it and smiled. "What's written on it?" She grinned proudly. "For the man who kept building." Aaron felt tears sting his eyes. He looked around at the children, laughing, painting, learning, and he realized that Henry's story, their story, had done what even time couldn't undo. It had built a world that remembered. That night, as Aaron sat on his porch overlooking the city lights, Maya joined him once again. They were older now, but their spirits still carried the rhythm of the construction yard. "You think he'd be proud?" she asked quietly. Aaron smiled at the horizon. "He already is. Look at the world. It's finally learning to build the right things." Maya nodded. "You know, people say you're the new Henry Walker." Aaron laughed softly. "No, there's no new Henry. There are just more builders now." A soft wind passed through the trees, whispering like distant applause. Aaron closed his eyes. Somewhere deep within that silence, he imagined the sound of bricks being laid, one by one, steady and strong. The same rhythm Henry once knew. The same song the world would keep singing. Because the true measure of a man's legacy isn't how long it lasts in memory, but how many hearts keep building when he's gone. The last brick. Years passed, and time, the silent builder, began to lay its own bricks upon Aaron's life. His hair turned silver, his steps slowed, but his eyes still carried that restless spark, the same one Henry Walker once had. The world had changed in ways even Henry could never have imagined. Cities gleamed with glass and steel, but behind them now stood people who worked with pride, not fear. The builder's code was no longer just a philosophy. It had become a way of life. From New York to Nairobi, from small villages to megacities, workers recited its principles before breaking ground. The phrase "build it right" was printed on helmets, stitched into uniforms, and engraved into hearts. And every time a new structure rose, so did the spirit of a man who once lifted bricks to find his soul. Aaron was invited to a World Summit on Humanitarian Development, his final public appearance. The hall was enormous, filled with leaders, scholars, and citizens who had come to hear the man who had continued Henry's dream. As he walked onto the stage, the audience stood in silence, honoring not just him, but everything he represented. He began without notes, without speeches. He held up a single worn brick, the same one he had kept since his early days. His voice trembled but remained steady. "This brick," he said, "was never meant for walls. It was meant for memory." He paused, scanning the audience. Henry Walker once said, "If you ever forget why you build, go back to the dust." I did, and in that dust, I found people. I found purpose. I found peace. He placed the brick on the podium and smiled faintly. We live in a world that builds fast but forgets why. We chase height and forget depth. We measure success in numbers and forget names. But the strongest structures aren't the ones that touch the sky. They're the ones that touch lives. A long silence followed. Then, as if moved by something ancient and sacred, the entire hall rose to its feet. No applause at first, only reverence. Then the sound grew, echoing like hammers striking steel, like hearts beating in rhythm. After the speech, as people crowded to meet him, Aaron quietly stepped away. He preferred silence to celebration. He walked outside, where the air was cool and clean. The evening light painted the city in shades of gold, and for a moment he felt Henry beside him again, not as a ghost, but as a presence in every honest act of work happening around the world. That night, Aaron returned home. His house was simple, built with his own hands decades ago. On the wall hung a faded photograph. Henry Walker, standing beside his workers, smiling in the sunlight. Beneath it, in Henry's handwriting, were the words, asterisk, "A builder's heart never retires." Asterisk. Aaron sat by the window, watching the skyline in the distance. A skyline now built by people who cared. He felt his strength fading, but his peace growing. Maya, older, but just as spirited, joined him with 2 cups of tea. "You've done enough," she said softly. "You've built enough." Aaron shook his head gently. The world will always need one more brick. He took a slow sip of tea and looked at the photo again. "Do you think he knows?" he asked quietly. Maya smiled. "He knows. Every time someone chooses honesty over greed, he knows." They sat together in silence. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby park. Life, the truest construction of all, continued. That night, Aaron passed away peacefully in his sleep. When they found him in the morning, the brick still rested on his bedside table, his hand resting on top of it. Next to it was a letter addressed to all future builders. It read, "Asterisk, if you want to honor me, don't build statues. Build schools. Build homes. Build trust. The walls we raise should never separate us, only shelter us. And when your hands grow tired, remember, you're not just building buildings, you're building hope." Asterisk. The letter went viral across the world. Millions read it. Construction workers framed it in their offices. CEOs printed it in company manuals. Governments quoted it in speeches. But what mattered most was what it did inside people. It reminded them that every job, every effort, every act of care was part of the same construction. Months later, a new memorial was unveiled beside Henry Walker's original wall. Two names were carved side by side. Asterisk Henry Walker, the first builder, asterisk, and asterisk Aaron Blake, the one who continued. Asterisk beneath their names, a single sentence stretched across the stone. Asterisk, they built not to be remembered, but so that others would never be forgotten. Asterisk. On the day of the unveiling, thousands gathered. Workers from around the world placed bricks from their own projects at the base of the monument, different colors, sizes, and shapes, forming a mosaic of unity. No speeches were made, no grand ceremonies. Just silence, gratitude, and the soft sound of bricks touching earth. Among the crowd, a young girl, the same one who had once given Aaron a clay brick, stood holding her father's hand. She looked up at the monument and whispered, "I want to be a builder too." Her father smiled. "Then remember what they taught us. Build hearts first." Years later, that little girl grew up to become an architect. Her first design wasn't a skyscraper or a mansion. It was a community library built entirely by volunteers. Above its entrance, she placed a bronze plaque that read, Asterisk, for Henry, for Aaron, for everyone who builds with love. Asterisk. And as people stepped inside to read, to learn, to dream, she stood outside, watching the light pour through the windows and whispered, "Still standing." Because some stories never end. They simply keep building, brick by brick, heart by heart, forever.